The New Light Grace Church was a building made of white stone and tall glass windows that caught the California sun. Inside, the air always smelled like expensive lemon polish and fresh lilies. It was a place where people wore their best suits and brightest smiles. Everything looked perfect. But in the very last row, in a seat that stayed in the shadows, even on the sunniest days, sat Maria Esperanza. Maria was 72 years old. Her face was a map of wrinkles, each one telling a story of a long life lived with love and hard work. She was tiny, almost disappearing into her oversized brown coat. In her lap, she always held a Bible. It wasn't a fancy Bible with gold edges. It was old, the black leather cover peeling at the corners, held together by rubber bands and hope. Maria was a widow. This meant her husband had passed away many years ago. After he died, Maria's life became very difficult. She lost her house because she couldn't pay the bills. She lost her savings because of bad people who took advantage of her. Eventually, she had nowhere to live but a small, cold shelter downtown. But every Sunday, Maria walked 3 miles to the church. She didn't go there to be seen. She went there because she believed that church was a sanctuary, a safe place where the poor were protected. The other members of the church didn't talk to her much. They saw her as the cleaning lady. After the songs were sung and the lights went down, Maria would stay behind. She would put on yellow rubber gloves and scrub the bathrooms until they shined. She did it for free because she wanted to give something back to God. She never asked for a penny. She never asked for a sandwich. She was as quiet as a mouse in a house full of lions. But Maria had a secret. Behind her tired eyes was a mind that was still as sharp as a diamond. And inside that old peeling Bible was a truth that the most powerful man in the town was terrified of. Pastor Jonathan Hale was a man who loved the spotlight. When he walked onto the stage, the room felt like it was buzzing with electricity. He was tall, handsome, and wore suits that cost more than Maria's husband had earned in a whole year. When Pastor Hale spoke, people listened. He had a voice like rolling thunder, deep and loud. He talked about grace and giving. He told the congregation that if they gave their money to the church, God would make them rich. New Light Grace is a family, he would shout, his arms wide. And in this family, we take care of our own. Everyone cheered. They felt lucky to have a leader like him. He had a private jet to fly him to meetings. He had a mansion with a swimming pool that looked like a blue jewel. He said these things were blessings for his hard work. But Maria knew better. Years ago, before Maria had lost everything, she had been a professional bookkeeper. A bookkeeper is someone who keeps track of every single penny in a business. They know where the money comes from, and they know where it goes. When Pastor Hale first started the church, he had asked Maria to help him organize the papers. He thought she was just a nice old lady who wouldn't understand the complicated numbers. He was wrong. Maria had seen things in the giant stacks of paper that made her heart ache. She saw money meant for the Hungry Children's Fund being used to pay for the pastor's fancy cars. She saw missionary gifts being sent to bank accounts in faraway islands that didn't even have churches. She didn't say anything at first. She was afraid. But she started taking notes. Every time she saw a lie, she wrote it down in the back of her Bible. She wrote down dates, names, and the exact amounts of money that were missing. To the world, Pastor Hale was on a pedestal, a high place where everyone looked up at him. But to Maria, he was just a man building a house out of stolen bricks. It was a very hot Sunday in July. The air conditioning in the church was humming, but Maria felt a different kind of heat in her chest. She hadn't eaten since Friday. Her stomach felt like it was full of cold stones. The shelter where she stayed had run out of bread, and she was too weak to walk to the food bank. During the part of the service where people share their needs, Maria did something she had never done before. She stood up. Her legs were shaking. Her hands clutched the old Bible so hard her knuckles were white. The room grew very still. People in the front rows turned around, their fancy hats and shiny glasses catching the light. "Pastor," Maria said. Her voice was soft and her accent was thick, but every word was clear. "I am sorry to speak. I am Maria. I haven't eaten in 2 days. I was hoping the church family could help me." Pastor Hale was standing behind a wooden pulpit that looked like it belonged to a king. He didn't look down at her with love. He didn't offer her a hand. Instead, his face turned red. He looked at Maria like she was a bug on his shiny shoes. "This is not the time for personal issues, Maria," he said. His voice was sharp, like a knife cutting through the air. Maria felt a tear roll down her cheek. "I only ask for prayer, Pastor, and maybe a little bread?" The congregation whispered. It was an uncomfortable sound, like dry leaves blowing on a sidewalk. Pastor Hale sighed, looking at his gold watch. He looked irritated, as if Maria was ruining a beautiful show. "If you cannot respect the order of this service," he said, his voice booming through the speakers, "then you should leave this church. We are here to worship, not to listen to beggars." The word beggar hit Maria harder than a physical blow. She froze. The ushers, the men who help people find their seats, started walking toward the back row. They didn't look Maria in the eye. They looked ashamed, but they did what the pastor told them to do. "I didn't mean trouble," Maria whispered, pulling her coat tight. But the ushers took her by the arms. They led her down the long aisle, past the rows of people she had cleaned for, past the children she had smiled at. Not one person stood up. Not one person said, "Stop." The heavy wooden doors of the church opened. Maria was led out into the blinding California heat. Then the doors closed with a loud, heavy thud. Inside, the music started playing again. Outside, Maria Esperanza was all alone. 3 days later, the sun was rising over the city. It was a beautiful morning, but for Detective Elena Brooks, it was the start of a very sad day. Elena was a detective who liked to solve puzzles. She had short, dark hair and eyes that noticed things other people missed, like a missing button on a coat or a smudge of dirt on a clean floor. She was called to a place beneath a giant freeway overpass. It was a noisy, dusty place where cars roared overhead like angry giants. There, lying on a thin piece of cardboard, was Maria. The police officers at the scene were already shaking their heads. "Just another homeless person," one said, writing in a notebook. "Looks like she just gave up. No food, no water. It's a tragedy, but it's an accident." Elena knelt down next to Maria. She saw the old brown coat. She saw the tiny wrinkled hands. But then she noticed something. Maria's hands were empty. "Where is her Bible?" Elena asked. "Her what?" the officer asked. "In the report from the shelter, they said she never went anywhere without a black, peeling Bible," Elena said. She looked around the dusty ground. There were old soda cans and bits of paper, but no Bible. Elena felt a cold shiver. If someone is very poor and they have one thing they love more than anything, they don't just lose it. Someone takes it. She went to the New Light Grace Church. She wanted to know who Maria was. When she walked in, she saw Pastor Hale. He was smiling and shaking hands. When Elena told him about Maria, he put on a very sad face. "Oh, poor Maria," he said, wiping a fake tear. "She was so confused. We tried to help her, but she was very unstable. She wandered off on Sunday and wouldn't come back." Elena didn't believe him. She saw the way his eyes moved to the door. She saw the way his hands stayed in his pockets. "Did she have her Bible with her?" Elena asked. Pastor Hale's smile twitched. "I wouldn't know. Like I said, she was a very troubled woman. It's best to just let her rest in peace." But Elena Brooks didn't like letting things rest, especially when a quiet old lady dies alone under a bridge, and a rich man in a shiny suit seems happy about it. 2 weeks passed. The story of Maria Esperanza was starting to fade from people's minds. At the church, everything went back to normal. The songs were loud and the offerings were big. But on a Sunday morning that felt just like any other, something impossible happened. Pastor Hale walked onto the stage to give his sermon. He reached out to grab his expensive gold-leaf Bible from the pulpit, but his Bible wasn't there. In its place was a black, peeling book held together by rubber bands. Pastor Hale froze. His face went from tan to white in a split second. He stared at the book like it was a ghost. The congregation began to whisper. They recognized that Bible. It was the one Maria used to clutch to her chest every single week. The pastor's hand trembled as he reached for it. He wanted to hide it, to throw it away, but thousands of eyes were watching him. He slowly opened the cover. Inside, on the very first page, there was a note written in Maria's neat, careful handwriting. "God sees everything, even the things we hide in the dark." Beneath the note was a list of dates. May 12th, $50,000 taken from the orphanage fund. June 4th, $100,000 sent to a bank in Switzerland. July 1st, the pastor bought a new boat with the tithe money. Pastor Hale slammed the Bible shut. He tried to speak, but his voice was gone. He looked like he was choking. I am not feeling well, he gasped into the microphone. He turned and ran off the stage, leaving the congregation in total silence. In the back of the room, Detective Elena Brooks was standing by the door. She wasn't wearing a suit. She was wearing a plain jacket, blending in with the crowd. She had put that Bible there. She had found it in a trash can behind the church a few days ago, but she had spent every night reading the notes inside. She realized that Maria hadn't just been a bookkeeper. She had been a witness. And the Bible wasn't just a book of prayers. It was a map of a crime. Elena Brooks spent the next 3 days at her desk, surrounded by coffee cups and stacks of paper. She was looking at the notes Maria had left. Maria had been brilliant. She knew that the pastor was using hush payments. This means he was giving people money to stay quiet about his secrets. Maria had written down the names of every person who had taken the money. One name kept appearing: Sarah Miller. Sarah was a young woman who worked in the church office. Elena went to find her. Sarah lived in a small apartment on the edge of town. When Elena knocked on the door, Sarah looked terrified. "I can't talk to you," Sarah whispered. "He told me to handle the situation with Maria. He said if I didn't help him get the Bible back, I would lose everything." "Sarah," Elena said gently, "Maria's gone, but she left a record. She wanted to protect the people of this church. You can help her do that." Sarah started to cry. She told Elena that on the Sunday Maria was kicked out, the pastor was panicking. He knew Maria had been writing things down. He had followed her to the shelter that night. "I saw them arguing near the freeway," Sarah sobbed. Maria told him, "God sees everything." She wouldn't give him the Bible. She ran away into the dark and he was so angry. He called someone, a man I've never seen. He told him to make sure she never talks again. Elena felt a cold anger in her chest. This wasn't just a story about a greedy man. It was a story about a man who would do anything to keep his power. But as Elena was leaving, she heard a loud screech of tires. She turned around just in time to see a black car speed away. Sarah Miller was lying in the street. She had been hit by a car that didn't have a license plate. Before Elena could even call for an ambulance, Sarah was gone. The pastor was cleaning up his mess, one person at a time. Elena sat in her car, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. 2 women were dead. One was a widow and one was a girl who was just trying to keep her job. She went to the phone company. She had a warrant, a special paper from a judge that said the phone company had to help her. She wanted to see Pastor Hale's phone records from the night Maria died. She found it. At 11:45 p.m. on that Sunday night, Pastor Hale had made a call. It wasn't to his wife, it wasn't to another pastor, it was to a number that didn't have a name. The call lasted exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Elena used her computer to trace the number. It led to a burner phone, a cheap phone that you can buy with cash so no one knows who you are. But the phone had been used near a construction site downtown. Elena went to the construction site. She talked to the workers. She showed them a picture of Maria. "Yeah, I saw her," a man in a hard hat said. "And I saw a guy in a fancy suit talking to her. He looked like he was trying to grab her bag. She ran under the overpass to get away from him. Then another guy, a big guy in a leather jacket, showed up in a black car. He stayed down there for a long time." Elena realized the pastor didn't push Maria. He didn't have to. He had sent someone to scare her, to take her Bible, and to leave her in the cold without her coat or her shoes. He knew that at 72 years old, she wouldn't survive the night. It wasn't a quick murder. It was a slow, cruel one. An audit is a scary word for people who are hiding money. It means the government comes in and looks at every single dollar. Elena Brooks didn't just want to arrest the pastor for Maria's death. She wanted to take away the thing he loved most, his empire. She called the FBI. She showed them Maria's Bible. When the FBI agents saw the names of the offshore accounts, they couldn't believe it. "This old woman found $18 million in stolen funds," one agent said, whistling. "She was better than our best detectives." The FBI moved fast. They froze the pastor's bank accounts. They took his private jet. They went to the church and started carrying out boxes and boxes of files. Pastor Hale tried to stop them. He stood on the steps of the church, shouting about religious freedom. He told the cameras that the police were trying to destroy a house of God, but the people in the pews were starting to wake up. They remembered the way Maria was treated. They remembered her tiny face and her shaky voice. They saw the boxes of evidence and realized that their donations weren't going to the poor. They were going to the pastor's closet. The pedestal was starting to crack. The white stone of the church didn't look so bright anymore. It looked stained. Sunday morning came again. This would be the last service at New Light Grace Church. Pastor Hale was desperate. He thought if he could just give one more great sermon, he could convince everyone he was innocent. He stood behind the pulpit, sweating through his expensive suit. "I am a victim of a witch hunt," he cried. "Maria Esperanza was a thief. She stole those notes to blackmail me." Suddenly, the back doors of the church swung open. It wasn't a group of ushers. It was Detective Elena Brooks and 6 police officers. The room went silent. The only sound was the clicking of Elena's boots on the marble floor. She walked all the way to the front. She didn't look at the congregation. She looked straight at Jonathan Hale. "Jonathan Hale," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, tax evasion, and the suspicious death of Maria Esperanza." The ushers tried to step forward, but the police held up their hands. Elena walked up the steps to the pulpit. She took out a small digital recorder. She had found it hidden inside the lining of Maria's Bible. It was a tiny device Maria had bought with her last few dollars to record the pastor's threats. Elena pressed play. Maria's voice filled the sanctuary. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere. "Pastor, please," the recording said. "The children need that money for medicine. You cannot take it." Then the pastor's voice came on. It was cold and full of hate. "Those children are nothing, Maria. This church is mine. If you ever speak of this, I will make sure you disappear. No one will ever find you, and no one will care." A woman in the 3rd row started to cry. A man in the front row stood up and took off his church pin. "She warned us," someone shouted from the back. As the officers put the metal handcuffs on the pastor's wrists, he didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a trapped animal. He looked at the empty seat in the back row, Maria's seat, and for a second, he looked truly terrified. Jonathan Hale never made it to a courtroom. He was held in a small, gray cell at the county jail. He had no silk suits. He had no fans. He had no private jet. He sat on a thin mattress and stared at the wall. 2 days after his arrest, the jail guard went to check on him. The cell was quiet. Jonathan Hale was found dead. The doctors said he had taken his own life because he couldn't face the world knowing everyone knew the truth. On the small metal table in his cell, there was a single piece of paper. It was a note. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't say he was sorry. It only had one sentence. "I kicked her out, and she took everything with her." He realized too late that Maria's power wasn't in money or fame. It was in the truth. And the truth is the only thing that can't be stolen or hidden forever. The church building was closed down by the bank. The white stone grew dull. The lilies died. The new light went out. Months later, the city decided to do something with the ruins of the church. They didn't want it to be a place of lies anymore. They tore down the mansion and the private jet hangar. They used the money they recovered from the offshore accounts to build a giant community center and a soup kitchen. They called it the Esperanza Center. At the grand opening, Detective Elena Brooks was there. She wasn't looking for puzzles anymore. She was just watching the people eat. There were mothers with babies, old men with tired eyes, and children who were laughing. They were being fed. They were being protected. In front of the center, where the fancy church doors used to be, they placed a small bronze plaque. It was simple and clean. It said, "The stone the builders rejected became the cornerstone." Elena knew what that meant. It meant that Maria, the woman the builders of the church threw away like trash, was actually the most important person of all. She was the one who held the whole thing together with her courage. Maria Esperanza never had a funeral when she died. No one claimed her body. But a year after the arrest, a group of people gathered at a small cemetery on a hill. There were no news cameras. There were no expensive suits. Elena Brooks stood there with Sarah Miller's mother and a few people from the shelter. They had bought a beautiful headstone for Maria. It wasn't a giant monument. It was a piece of smooth gray stone. Carved into the top was the image of an open book. "She saved us," a man from the shelter said softly. "She was hungry, but she made sure we would never be hungry again." They laid yellow roses on the grass. Elena stayed until everyone else had left. She looked at the stone and felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She realized that Maria Esperanza's life wasn't a tragedy. It was a victory. She had lost her home and her husband, but she had never lost herself. She had stayed a sanctuary even when she had nowhere to live. The ruins of New Light Grace Church are gone now. In their place is a playground where kids play tag and a garden where people sit in the sun. But sometimes if you walk past the Esperanza Center on a quiet Sunday morning, you can almost hear a soft, thick accent on the wind. People say that the greatest crimes happen in dark alleys, but the story of Maria and the pastor reminds us that they also happen in places with bright lights and loud music. It reminds us to look at the people in the back rows, to listen to the quietest voices, because often those are the voices that are telling the biggest truths. Maria Esperanza was just a widow with an old Bible, but she changed the world by refusing to let a lie live. And today, if you look at the cornerstone of the center, you'll see it's still standing strong. It's a place of refuge, a place where the broken are welcome, just like Maria always knew it should be.